In the news for November 19th, 2021, I am Brett Birdie from appsandlaw.com.
Hi, this is Jeff Richardson from iPhone JD. Good morning, Brett.
Good morning, Jeff. And I have to say happy birthday again. Not for you, but for iPhone JD, this little child of a blog that you birthed 13 years ago.
Time flies. I tell you what, they grow up 13. So fast, don't they?
Congratulations, yes. My friend, on this.
Thank you.
This is great because of the blog 13 years ago that you started. And I mean, there's several things that we definitely want to cover here in a few minutes, but that started the In the News post that you did every Friday morning, which I've known you for at least maybe these many years. Mm-hmm. But that became the kernel of the idea. Like, hey, I love talking with Jeff about all this stuff. Why not start a podcast? And here we are on these podcasts, except for next week, right?
Yes,
next week is Turkey Day.
Little Thanksgiving in the United States. We will not have a podcast next week, but we will see everybody in 2 weeks. So
we have been faithful to this now. This is episode 28. So 28 weeks we've been doing this because you have been faithful for almost 13 years doing the In the News post, which I just think is great. But next Friday we'll take off since it is the day after Thanksgiving, and we should rightly be with our families and other loved ones. And so we'll be back the week after, but next week we won't have a podcast post, which is okay. We'll come back as soon as we can, and as soon as the turkey digests. So let's get back to the 13th birthday. This is just absolutely fantastic. You had a post earlier this week that you talked about how you have been doing this now for 13 years. And every year you go through and talk about like the most popular posts that you have had. I guess basically, right, it's the number of clicks that people have gone through.
Yeah,
here.
Just the number of page views and stuff. And it's always an interesting way. I enjoy looking back at those every year because these are the ones that usually have attracted attention. You know, maybe they've gone viral on Twitter or something like that. You know, they've grabbed people's attention. What are people interested in? And, you know, I was totally surprised at the very
like an iPhone case.
Yeah, the past year, if you had told me, you know, the most popular post that you wrote the past year was on an iPhone case, I'm like, really? But, you know, it makes sense because when you're buying an iPhone, like, should I get the case? You know, this is a very logical question. So I could see a lot of people being interested in that, but there's some other interesting posts in here too. So, but it's been fun. And I have to admit, it's been a blink of the eye, but it's amazing that it's been 13 years when iPhone JD started back in 2008, the iPhone was new. You know, the iPhone, I didn't own the very first iPhone, but my first one was the second generation, the iPhone 3G. And I had some friends in New Orleans that encouraged me to start a blog on something. And I was like, well, why not an iPhone blog? And so much has changed since. I mean, when I started the blog, the App Store had just opened that summer, Brett. It was, you know, so I remember when the App Store first opened, they're like, we have 500 apps. And then,
wow,
not that long later than that, you know, there was 1,000 apps, and then there was 10,000 apps. And it's just incredible how much it's grown since then. And, you know, so many different ways that people are using iPhones. But that was my very first post on iPhone JD was, you know, why I like using an iPhone and, of course, use it so much more. Yeah, what you're showing on the screen right now was a picture from the Wall Street Journal back in 2008, where it was, you know, Apple was advertising the fact that there were apps.
Look at that.
And, you know, 10,000 apps and things like Facebook, still very popular today. The Shazam app,
Sudoku,
which Apple now owns Shazam.
I know. That's
fascinating that Shazam has been there since the very beginning.
Wow.
You know, a flight status app. People are still using iPhones for that sort of stuff. Then you also have things like, you know, AOL Instant Messenger, which people are not using anymore. But so, and a lot of these games don't exist anymore.
Awesome.
But it's interesting to think back from, you know, where we've come. In fact, you know, that's an interesting lead in to one of the things I wrote about on iPhone JD this week, Brett, was that we had some new statistics for any of the listeners that are attorneys. ABA came out with their 2021 tech survey, which looks at all sorts of technology that lawyers use, which is sort of a barometer for all professionals, I suppose. But one of the things that I've been tracking since they started tracking in 2011 was smartphone attorneys use. Because I don't know about, I mean, I'm sure you saw this too. I mean, in the 2000s and 2010s, you know, it was at first it was all BlackBerry, right? That, you know, every lawyer had a BlackBerry. It was basically a required part of your lawyer costume. And, but then that's changed over the years. And so when the iPhone first came out, the BlackBerry was still by far the number one attorney, the number one smartphone. But the BlackBerry use just decreased substantially over the next few years. Android was around when the iPhone was first around, but and its use has pretty much stayed steady in that 10 to 20%. But the iPhone has basically swallowed up every other percentage that there is. So it's really interesting.
I love how you've done this. You cover this so well every single year from this ABA Tech Survey. This is from the ABA has a legal technology resource center, and like you said, it is sort of a barometer for other professionals, I have found. But it just so happens it's the neck of the woods that you and I live in. But I love how you create these nice little pie charts, and it has been amazing to see over these last 10 years. The iPhone has gone from like 50% and 60%, and a lot of us said, okay, well, it's probably not going to get much more than 75%, and it hasn't gotten much more, but it has continued to grow. And those slivers for BlackBerry or the Windows Phone or other, I don't even know what other would be necessarily, but the ABA tracks that.
Yeah, so this year it hit the all-time high of 80%. So I mean, eight out of every 10 attorneys is using an iPhone. And I'm sure that you see that in many other industries. In fact, in larger firms, the percentage is that's a great chart that shows it, because at the very beginning,
right here,
you have the BlackBerry use is almost 50%, and then it's now zero. And the iPhone has just taken all of those others. People that were using BlackBerries, Trios, anything else. Android has stayed out there, and it went up to 25%.
It's been steady.
In 2018, and then down a little bit. But the iPhone has eaten everything else's lunch. And, it is by far the dominant smartphone, which, I like. I mean, sometimes big is good. Sometimes you want to have a niche player. I personally love it as someone who's been using a Mac since the 1980s. One of the problems with the Mac during some of the darkest days of the Mac's existence was that it was such a small percentage of the market that you just couldn't find the programs for it, right? And so that was frustrating when you had to use Windows, because that's where the software was. But because the iPhone has been so dominant, it means that, the good apps are going to always be on the iPhone. And I, as somebody that enjoys using the iPhone, the fact that it is so popular has benefited me, because it means there's just a lot more out there, apps, accessories, everything. Yeah.
Well, something else I thought of, you mentioned large firms. And I have to say, when I was working at a large firm, I was doing practice support. I wasn't practicing law, but I remember when the iPhone first came around, people were just like, mostly like professional IT people, right? This is brand new for them. And they were like, no, we don't do Apple. There's like, we're not going to do that. Like the iPhone is going to be like, that's a consumer thing. Like that's for the fancy people. We're going to stay with some of these old, Palm Treos or the BlackBerries. Like that's tried and true. And I get where they're coming from. I'm not making light of that at all. But just amazing to see how that has certainly gone in the large law firms. But something else, I know you and I didn't talk about this, but I think you linked to it. Apple just this past week released something called, is it Business Essentials, I think? And we don't have to go into the whole lot, but it was basically like a mobile device management system for like even small companies, right? A lot of these big law firms and big companies have very huge mobile device management systems, large systems, and they have to have a small army of IT folks to manage those, and rightly so. But even today, it was here it is. You talked about it. You did link it here. It's called Business Essential Service. That it's basically like an MDM is what we call it, basically to manage the mobile devices, even for small companies, like between 50 and 500 employees, and I think even smaller in some cases that it can do that. And it's just an easy way for people, even again, small companies, small law firms, to manage these devices. And the fact that it is becoming even easier and maybe a little bit more commonplace, I think that number is just going to continue to stay at 80% and probably even grow a little bit. Android's not going to go away, and it's great to have that competitor out there, but just amazing to see that growth on there. So thanks for covering all of that.
That story that you alluded to is an interesting one, Brett, because, so much of legal technology has, often controlled by the people at big law firms, rather, right, which is my perspective. It's often controlled by the folks in the IT department. This is what you're going to use. This is what's available. And the iPhone was one of those rare examples of how people just demanded it. Attorney says, no, we really want to use an iPhone. It's so much better than the BlackBerry. This is what we want. And it got to the point where large organizations, whether they were law firms or other types of companies, basically had to say, okay, I guess if you're going to demand to use these, we're going to have to bend to accommodate it. But because of concerns about things like security and stuff, mobile device management addresses that, because you can enforce security policies in everybody's phones, and now Apple's helping with that. But it's interesting. You often don't have these sort of grassroots efforts that, the people are demanding such and such, and then that's what leads to the company adopting it. But the iPhone is certainly an example of that, and the fact that they're now at 80%, almost 85% in large law firms shows you how successful that has been. So anyway, suffice it to say, it's been an interesting transition over the last 13 years.
Absolutely. Well, I just want to say one quick more thing on this. The other thing that we sort of danced around a little bit is just the fact that people want to have just one single device as well, Jeff, right?
True. Good point.
And a lot of these mobile device management systems, both at, a firm like where you are and smaller firms, is you don't want to carry two devices, right? You only want to carry one. And it's so important, and it's becoming more and more important, not just because, as legal professionals, we have an ethical duty to protect information, but, there's a lot of issues with data privacy and personal privacy and that kind of a thing going on, that having these capabilities today, and the fact that Apple is embracing that, I think, a little bit more, so with certainly this business essential service is good to see. Because it is important to make sure that, all of those IT professionals, they do have a task, a responsibility to make sure that the devices are secure, it can be found, it can be turned off. But they also want to give you a little bit of a leash to use it on a personal level as well. Mm-hmm. It's still confusing, and we're still trying to work through a lot of that on there. But anyway, I just wanted to mention that. I know we're kind of digging in on that a little bit, but all of this to say, it's just been great to see your journey. Can I just say, did you mention this on here? Your banner picture. So you've been using the same one, I think, for the entire time. I got it behind me here. Like, that literally is, you laid your phone down on a yellow legal pad.
That's
and
right.
You took a picture of it, right?
November 17, 2008. You can see the date right there on the iPhone. It's got the 17 on it. And
no kidding! You can.
Those were at the very bottom too, those were the apps that were on my home screen at the time. You can look at them, and I barely even recognize some of those apps nowadays.
Wow.
Contacts and camera and stuff like that. But the YouTube app. So that was it. Yeah, I took the picture, and I've thought about.
You can't ever get rid of that.
I've thought about updating it over the years, and maybe one day I will. But now, it's sort of gone to this nostalgia point.
Absolutely. Yeah, you can't get rid of it. And then, just the last thing quickly that you do, I love doing this too, just because it's so curious, is that not only do you reference the top posts from the past year, which last year apparently was an iPhone case, but you also talk about a little bit about the visitors to iPhone JD. Wasn't it something different this year? Did you say something was a little bit interesting?
One thing was different
for the visitors.
There were more visitors from China than ever before, and I don't really know what that is. I don't know if that's
interesting.
That there's a real visitors or what the story is there. But I've always thought it interesting that the wonderful thing about the internet is that it truly is international. And I routinely will get emails from attorneys in Melbourne, Australia, or London, England, and stuff like that. And things are, the law, practicing law is a little different in those countries, but it's not so different that the same tools that we're using here are being used around the world. And I love it. I mean, it's great. I mean,
that's a great point.
It's nice to sort of be reminded that we're all part of this global community, and, not that we want to start, singing Kumbaya or something like that, but it does remind you that we're all in this together, and that, there's a lot of people around the world that have the same interests that we do. So
that's great. So great. I love this. There's one city had a single visitor, Powerview Pine Falls, a town in the Canadian province of Manitoba. Exactly. Shout out to Powerview Pine Falls.
Whoever that one leader is, thank you for your service.
Thank you for being there. All right. So, okay. And thank you, Jeff. Truly and honestly, it's just been great to watch your journey over all these years, and that you continue to put so much work and time and effort into this, into your blog, and, continue to report on the surveys and stuff. And it's just been great to be together, even with you here on the podcast that we've been doing, only because you've been doing the In the News post for so long on this. So thank you. So, okay, maybe we'll shine the spotlight on you, and we can maybe quickly shine the spotlight on me for a minute or two, because you were kind and generous enough to link to a video that I just posted this past week on my Apps and Law blog about, I got a couple of questions about this, but I also wanted to figure it out myself. In 2014, I remember it well. March, because that day, I think it was March 27. Am I right? March 27, 2014, Jeff. You and I were together in the same room at the ABA Tech Show, a conference. And I was giving a presentation with someone else in that room, Mark Unger, a very good friend. And we were talking about using Microsoft Word on the iPad. That was our presentation. And we had this great presentation all planned out because we were talking about the different apps you could use. And at the time, Microsoft did not have a Microsoft Word app available for the iPad.
Correct.
If you remember that day, there was nothing. I used Docs to Go. I think there was
lots of third-party ways to do it, but none of them worked great. None of them worked great.
They all could make it happen, but there was always some downside. Like the formatting wasn't quite right, all because Microsoft did not want to release an official Word app for the iPad. But that very day, I think our presentation was at 2 p.m. and at 12 at noon, Microsoft had a press event in New York, and they came out and announced, of all things, Microsoft Office available for the iPad. I'll never forget that, because in fact, we invited you up to the stage, I think, Jeff, in that room to be like, hey, let's talk about this a little bit more, because it had just broke and I didn't really have it on my radar. Yeah. Anyway, that was a long setup for this, but since 2014, we have all been happily using Microsoft Office and Microsoft Word, Microsoft Excel, and Microsoft PowerPoint on the iPad. They were 3 separate apps, and they still continue to be 3 separate apps. But about February of this year, so it's been a few months, Microsoft released a single Office app. That's what I call it. I don't know what officially it's called, but I call it a single or a unified Office app, which is one single app that actually encapsulates all 3 of those apps. And so I posted a video on this past week on my Apps and Law blog, and you were kind enough to link to it. And it was fun to kind of explore this a little bit and to better understand the differences and why you would maybe use the individual apps versus the single Office app.
Yeah, I recommend that folks check out your video. You did a great job with it, Brett, because there's tons of information in there. But one of the, just to pick one, and it's just one of many tidbits, is for the most part, if you're going to use Microsoft Word, for the most part, using the standalone Word app is the same as using the Microsoft Office app and then selecting the Word part of the Office app.
Correct.
But they're not 100% identical. Correct. There are some slight differences. And, one example is one of the things that I enjoy doing, especially on the larger screen on my iPad Pro, is having side-by-side apps. And an app has to support the side-by-side multitasking feature. The standalone Microsoft Word app does. So you can have multiple, it's not just that it supports it, but you can have multiple instances. That's the feature. So I can have a Word document on my left and another Word document on my right, and I can scroll independently through them and can look at things and compare things. The Microsoft Office app, although you can put it on one side of the screen, you can't then have a second instance of it on the other side of the screen. Now, if you have both the Office app and the Word app, you could put one on the left and one on the right and get around it that way. But there's no reason for that difference, except that maybe Microsoft just hasn't done it. So that's a reason why, as you point out very well in this video, you might want to use the Word app. But as you point out in the video, there's other times where you might want to use the Office app. And a perfect example of that is converting a file from PDF to Word. Why don't you explain that? Because there really haven't been great tools for that. And this looks like a really good one.
So you did an excellent job of describing like that single Office app, the functionality, the core functionality for like editing Word documents or PowerPoint presentations. It's pretty much the same as if you use the individual apps versus the single Office app. So they've really just wrapped all 3 of those apps together into this single Office app, but they also included in the single Office app this page of actions. It's just one page. And a couple of them are things that I can either do natively on the iPad, or I've used other apps to do. For example, image to text. So today with iOS 15, we have live text. We can take an image and we can convert text, even though I used to use a different app for doing that, but that's native inside iOS. Then they have this whole section of actions in this single Office app to do more with PDFs. So I use PDF Expert or the Adobe Acrobat app on the iPad. But inside this Microsoft Office single app, you can sign a PDF, scan to PDF, you can convert pictures to PDF, which is all great. And I would use other apps to do all of those things, but now I can do it inside this single Office app, which is nice. And by the way, the single Office app will also open PDF files. Now, you can't do a lot of editing the same way that I would do it in Goodreader or PDF Expert or something like that, but you have some basic annotation tools inside this Office app. So again, that could be another plus in doing that. But one that you just mentioned, which I get asked about a lot, and I think mostly only from a lot of legal professionals, because we deal a lot with PDF files, is people want to take a PDF file and convert it into a Word document. And I think most of the time it's because they want to copy text from it, or they want to edit that document. They want to edit the text of a file. And, sometimes lawyers play games sometimes, and we send PDF files that either are not searchable or, they're not formatted the right way. And what we want to do is convert that into Word. I've used other apps to do that on the iPad, Jeff, but now this is built into the single Office app. So you can pull a PDF up in the single Office app. You can say, convert it to Word, and then inside the same app, you can then edit the Word document. That's a pretty powerful approach in doing that. And it's just kind of all bundled up together, which makes it nice. Yeah,
it's a great feature. And, as you said, other apps do it. I mean, PDF Expert does a version of it, but, who's going to do Word apps better than Microsoft Word? So,
yeah, that's true. And, the other thing quickly, I try to explain a little bit in this video here as well, that it's been a little confusing how Microsoft requires you can do some of this stuff with a free Microsoft account. So you don't have to pay for the Office. You can do some of it with a free Microsoft account. But if you get a subscription to either Microsoft 365 or Office 365, you can do a lot more. But there's also some queer little things that they have in here. Like if your screen is 10.1 inches or more, then you have to have a subscription to Microsoft 365 in order to edit anything. Anyway, I try to explain it a little bit in the video there as well. But I think I know why Microsoft does some of that, but sometimes it gets people a little confused. The best case scenario is that if you have a subscription to Microsoft 365 or Office 365, which most professionals of all colors are going to have, then it's going to work the best for you on there. And having that subscription does give you the ability to use it on both computers as well as multiple devices, like your iPhone and your iPad. And a lot of this is all applicable to both the iPhone and the iPad as well, by the way. We've been talking about the iPad, but you can do this on the iPhone as well. Good stuff. So thanks again for linking to that.
Folks should check out that video. Great stuff.
Yeah. So another big story that I heard a lot of people talking about this week, and you linked to two good stories here, is I don't know if this is Apple capitulating to a lot of people, screaming that they wanted this, or if it's just sort of an eventual move. But you can maybe explain it a little bit better. Apple now allows you or third-party repair companies to now self-service, like DIY repairs, right? I don't know how the best way to describe that, Jeff. But
so the issue is there's been a big movement in the United States and probably other countries too, called the right to repair movement. The idea that if you buy something, you own it and you should have the right to change it or to monkey around with it. And so to put it in the example of the iPhone, if your screen breaks, why do you have to go to Apple to repair the screen? Why can't you just get an Apple part? Yeah. Why can't you just get the part and just repair it yourself? The idea being that maybe it's cheaper, or maybe, it's just faster. You don't want to wait in line or something like that. And so, and it's, you have been able to go to third-party repair services for many years now, but Apple hasn't, Apple's almost, allowed them to exist without really paying much attention. So whether it's because Apple knows that governmental bodies are going to force this in the future, or maybe let's be nice, maybe Apple's just trying to do the right thing. They announced that they're offering this self-service repair program so that individuals and other small shops that aren't necessarily authorized, dealers or something, they can get the actual parts from Apple, like, a screen for an iPhone, and they can get the tools, because many times you have to have a certain type of tool. It's not like a regular Phillips screwdriver for an iPhone. And so they're going to offer all of these things. And so it'll be interesting to see anything that allows people. I mean, I think that this is probably a net good. People have said in the past, oh, well, Apple doesn't want you to repair the iPhone. They just want you to go ahead and buy a new one. And, maybe there's a tiny bit of truth in there. Apple would love it if people bought new iPhones. But Apple, the flip side is, unlike Android, Apple is the one company that when they come out with a new version of the operating system, they make sure that it works with devices that are really, really, really old. They know that people want to keep using their devices for a long time. And I think Apple is totally happy with that, especially nowadays, Brett, because nowadays, we talked about Apple's earnings quarter, a couple of days last week,
Right.
and that
Right.
Apple is making so much money not just from selling hardware but from selling services. They want
Services.
they're
Right. Right.
fine with you
Right.
continuing to use an old iPhone and maybe paying for the Apple TV Plus television service to watch those shows on your iPhone, and paying for iCloud storage, and paying for all the other things. So I
Right.
don't know that Apple necessarily had a profit reason not to do it. I think it was more of just they didn't want people monkeying with their stuff, but they've opened up a little bit. So we'll see when it actually becomes available how it works. But
Yeah.
it'll be really interesting that you can buy tools from Apple, parts from Apple. Maybe those tools will be like the perfect tool. The Johnny Ive tool.
Yeah.
Will be interesting to see what those tools look like. So it's interesting stuff. Again, the proof will be in the pudding when it comes out, but it should
Right.
be coming out soon.
Agreed. I think I can see both ways on this, because I like the fact that I have the option if I wanted to repair it myself. Although I think you linked to another story here where John Gruber at Daring Fireball, initially he said, "Oh, who's going to want to repair their own iPhone?"
Mm-hmm.
But he followed up a day or two after that statement and said, "Okay, I understand it's not like for individuals themselves, but maybe it's for all of these third-party companies, right?" As he said, like that are not official Apple independent repair companies like this. So I thought that was a good point that he made. But Jeff, when John first said that thing, that first comment, I almost agreed with him. Like, I don't want to monkey with if I've got a problem with my iPhone, I do want to go to an actual Apple store, and I want the actual Apple people that have been trained to fix that for me.
Yeah.
Or use Apple Care, that kind of a thing. That's probably a little bit different. But I also can see the idea, like, I'm glad that there's that option now. I don't know if this is really going to change a whole lot of stuff. I do like the fact that, the biggest difference here, when you were talking about Android, I was thinking about this, is that Apple controls all of the components, right? With Android, you've got different repair, Samsung and different companies that you might be able to have, different parts from. But Apple controls both the hardware and the software on this. And so I think it's good that they're opening this up. How much that people are going to use that, I think is going to be maybe a comfort level. I've repaired my own computers and other things before, but when it comes to the Apple products, I almost just want to go to somebody that I trust. Now, the last comment I'll make on that is, I'm fortunate that I live in a city where I do have access to an actual physical Apple store,
Good
right?
point.
And that's the
Good
other
point.
thing.
Yeah.
There's maybe our friend in Powerview, Pine Falls, he probably doesn't have an Apple store, or he or she doesn't have an Apple store, right? And so, but they may have a third party independent repair company there that they would need to take their iPhone to. So I can see where that can be extremely valuable on that as well.
Good point.
So yeah, good stuff on that. Okay. And then the last thing quickly that I just liked that you linked to was an app that I have used for many, many years that I got to be honest with you, I had not updated it, but this is Tweetbot. So everybody knows Twitter. And if you're on Twitter, you probably have the official Twitter app. And I liked using different or additional apps. And my favorite has always been Tweetbot. I think yours as well. It's
Yes.
from a company called Tapbots, which I love all of their apps. I use their calculator app on there. I love it much better than the built-in app as well. But Tweetbot has come out, and I think similar to the story that you linked to from Federico here at Mac Stories, I used to use it solely and honestly, exclusively. But then Twitter started like limiting the access to some of the capabilities and features. So then I started going back to using the actual official Twitter app because it had more things in it. But I don't like it as much, Jeff, because it's got stories. It bubbles up things that it thinks I want to read, and I just want to see everything in a chronological order. And there's a lot of other features on Tweetbot that is much better as well.
Yeah, it's interesting because the other social media platforms, Facebook, there's no third party Facebook app. If you want Facebook,
that's a
use
good point.
Facebook,
Yeah.
But Twitter has really from the beginning, they have had this sort of love-hate relationship where they have allowed third parties to access the tweet stream, but they've limited what they can do. And for a long time, it got to the point where you really thought that Twitter just wanted those third-party apps to go away. But now they're saying, look, we're sort of coming around. We're going to allow the third-party apps to do more of the things that the native app can do. and respect the fact that there is a different perspective. And the one that you hit on was a perfect one.
Glad, right.
I also am, people call it sort of a Twitter completionist. I don't follow a lot of people on Twitter, but I do tend to read all the posts. I don't just say, let's start from the bottom and go down, and,
right.
and I like that Tweetbot has that chronological. And if I stop on, last night and I go back the next day, even if I go back on my iPad and I was using my iPhone the night before, it knows where I am on the timeline and it can go through it. And sometimes I'll scroll through quickly and I may not pay close attention to every post, but I like doing it. Whereas the Twitter app, like the Facebook app, wants it to be more of sort of algorithmic. We'll pull the most important things up for you. And it's not that one is right or wrong. They're just different approaches. And this is the advantage
I use both.
of having a third-party app is allow different folks who want to present a different way to use the app, give them a way to do it. So I'm glad that Twitter is opening itself up. Many of the best features on Twitter over the last, decade plus have been features that first started on a third-party app like Tweetbot or Twitterific, and then came into the main app. So it's great that they are, expanding it. Great. So as Twitter is allowing third-party apps to do more, Tweetbot itself can do more. And that's what this post talks about.
That's a great point. And I remember several years ago when, there was like a whole uproar, especially when Twitter changed their API. It ain't like they were going to change their mind necessarily, because it's like they can do what they want. But I'm glad to see that they are kind of turning around a little bit. Now, Federico still says there are several Twitter features that Tweetbot cannot access. But for his needs, everything is, he goes, it's now enough that it doesn't make me miss the official Twitter app anymore on there. So that's great. By the way, can I just also say, I looked at this. I still have my old Tweetbot 5 on my iPhone, and Tapbots has been great to continue to. I don't know if they're not updating that necessarily, but they warned me a couple of years ago when they changed over to a subscription model that this isn't going to be updated all the way, but they still allow me to use it, and it works just great, and I still like it. But I think I'm going to end up going to the subscription, which I think is $6 a year. It's almost nothing.
It is. I've been doing
it is. I was just looking it up.
Mm-hmm.
And the fact that it's a subscription model now, which means that they'll continue. I'm thrilled that it was just a couple of days ago Twitter changed their API and Tweetbot already upgraded. So anyway, the company is Tapbots, and Tweetbot is what we're talking about here. So that was a lot of talking on just one app, but it's well worth it. It's a good app on that. Okay, so let's get to our tips quickly.
In the know.
Because I know we have been talking a lot about this, but I'm gonna put yet another quick spotlight on me for something that I just released this week. However, it's an excellent tip, and I'll explain why. I have some courses at a website called iPracticeOnAnIPad.com, mostly obviously for legal professionals, in the sense that I have a couple of courses here where, number one, it's a course on how to manage files on the iPad and access them. And then number two, probably the number one request that I've had over the years is, how can I give presentations on my iPad?
Oh, good topic.
And it's a good topic. So with this, it's all brand new material. But one of the things that I obviously cover, Jeff, as you and I know, is using an Apple TV to give a presentation to a projector or a widescreen television from an iPad. And it works out great. It still does. I go into all the details on that. However, I'm glad that I covered a second similar type of a scenario, because I just got an email a couple weeks ago from a gentleman that he is actually going back to the court, and he says his Apple TV it doesn't work with whatever system that they have, or he doesn't have the ability to get access to a Wi-Fi or something like that. Something wasn't working with the Apple TV. So he asked if I had another recommendation, and of course I did. I've been using this now for quite a while. It's a piece of software called Air Server. There are several other like reflector type apps available. I think you and I have used several in the past. I don't know a better way to describe it other than the reflector, because basically what it is, it's a piece of software that you run on your computer, and at least in the sense of an Air Server software with an iPhone or an iPad, that computer then projects itself as an AirPlay receiver, if that makes sense.
Just as if the computer was an Apple TV or something like that.
Exactly, Jeff. Exactly. So I have found that this worked fantastic, and I have used this multiple times, because if I go to a physical location to give a presentation, many times I say to the people, I want to present from my iPad, and they're like, I don't know how you're going to do that. But they're always set up for me to present from a laptop, right? So what I do is I run the air server software on my laptop, and then I still can then wirelessly project my iPad screen to my laptop, which is connected to the projector or a widescreen TV, and it works wonderfully.
That's a great
but
idea.
The real tip that I'm adding on this is how I give presentations over Zoom or Teams as well. The Zoom app, and I think Teams does this as well, they have a built-in way where you can wirelessly connect your iPad to the presentation, right? And present through there. And that's great, except when I do that, I don't get access to the same boxes of the Zoom interface. So what I have started doing is I run my air server software on my computer. I connect my iPad to the air server software, and then I share through Zoom or Teams that air server window. I know this sounds a little complicated, but I explained it all
so
in
other words,
my course.
You have all of the controls of Zoom on the computer, and yet you're showing from your iPad. That is very clever, Brett, because I've done that before. When you just go straight from the iPad to Zoom, you lose a lot of the controls of the Zoom software.
Exactly.
That's a great tip.
And I love having that. By the way, I can even make that air server window on my computer screen very small, right? So it doesn't take up a lot of space, and then I can look at another document at the side. But the audience only sees the air server window. And even if I have it small, the audience still sees it as complete and big because I'm sharing that single window. Anyway, this attorney that reached out to me asking this question, he's like, that is fantastic. That works beautifully in the courtroom. He doesn't have to worry about, taking an Apple TV, because with an Apple TV, it can't connect to VGA, right? It can only do HDMI. So that's another failsafe. And this court only had VGA, connects beautifully to a laptop computer, like a Windows computer. And then he can share his iPad screen through the laptop on there. So anyway, thanks for letting me post about my iPractice on an iPad course as well. I go through all the details on that, but that is an excellent tip. The air server software, I think, is $20 or maybe $35 for a business license. It is absolutely worth having on your computer, Windows or Mac. It'll work in either one. And then you just fire it up whenever you want to share your screen through it, whether for a Zoom meeting or a physical in-person meeting as well.
Great tip.
That's my tip.
I like it. Okay, so here's my tip. My tip is has to do with the Photos app, and it's something that's been building up over the years, but I think it's reached a really nice pinnacle in iOS 15, which is the Get Info feature. So when you're looking at a photo on your iPhone or an iPad, but I will use the iPhone as an example. You're looking at a photo on the iPhone. If you swipe up on the iPhone picture, or if you tap at the bottom of the screen, that little info button, you will get all sorts of options and information. And just to go through them, there's just great stuff in there. First of all, of course, this has been around for a while, but the way that they present it is differently. You will see the people that Apple has identified in the picture. There's little circles at the very bottom left. And so this is a picture of John. This is a picture of Susie. Sometimes you'll see that your iPhone doesn't know who it's a picture of, and you can tap on that circle and you can say, oh no, that's John. And then it'll learn that. And so then in the future, if you're trying to find pictures that John is in, it knows where all of them are. So that works well. There's a caption field, which is relatively new, and the caption field is great. Just scroll up a little bit and there's a little text field, and you can write something about the picture. And the reason I find this so useful is that you can then find that picture again in the future. Sometimes people will take their pictures and they'll put them into albums. You can do that if you want, but sometimes I just take a picture and it's just in my photo roll. But there will be a time where I want to go back and see that picture again. Maybe, I caption it COVID because it's a picture of my COVID vaccine card. And, I took that picture 2 months ago and I don't want to scroll up and down and look for it. Just do a search for the word. Or maybe there's something, not too long, actually it's been a while ago. My wife and I were out at a restaurant, and of all people, New Orleans own Richard Simmons was there, and he was taking pictures of people. And so I was like, I'm going to take a picture of my wife with Richard Simmons. Why? It just seems so bizarre. Why not? He's walking around with people doing it. And I was trying to find that in a conversation, and I had put in the little caption field, Richard Simmons. And when you search for Richard Simmons on my iPhone, you don't find a lot, but you find that picture. So the caption field is useful. You also
added that's brilliant, Jeff. I just did that for a picture I have of my wife. I love it because it's just a good way to reference what that picture was.
That one particular picture if you want to find that needle out of a haystack, you can put needle in your caption and you can find that needle in the future. So that's another thing you can do from that info screen. Something brand new in iOS 15 is you can see items that are detected by visual lookup. lookup. So if it's a picture of a dog and the iPhone can identify the breed of the dog, it'll tell you. If it's a picture of the Eiffel Tower, it will recognize it's the Eiffel Tower. For some pictures that are landmarks or other types of things, it's almost like, Wikipedia baked into your iPhone. So that's there. If you got this picture because it was shared with you from messages or Facebook or something like that, you'll see a little indication there, so you know where this picture came from in the first place. You'll see, of course, the date and the time that the photo was taken. But one of the new features is in iOS 15, you can change that information if it's wrong. If you took the picture with your iPhone, the date's going to probably be fine. But if you imported the picture from someone else, for example, someone sent to you in messages, that information might be wrong and you might want to fix it. On the very first In the Know segment that you and I had on this podcast, which was actually on our episode number 2, we didn't have that on tap. How could we have an episode of the podcast without offering tips? What were we thinking? I don't know. But on episode number 2, we had our first In the Know segment, and I recommended an app called Metafo where you could adjust some of this information, like the date, the time, and the place. But that's now built in, so that's great. You can see camera metadata such as, the lens, shutter speed, file size, stuff like that. Sometimes that's just sort of something interesting to look at. And then you can also, of course, see where the photo was taken, which has been there for a long time. But what's new in iOS 15 is you can adjust that. So again, if somebody sends you a picture and it doesn't have coded where it is, and I find it useful to have pictures have the metadata of where they were taken, because one of the ways that you can find an old picture, if you've got tens of thousands of pictures, is like, gosh, years ago, I remember that we were in Seattle and I took this picture and I'm trying to find it. But one way to find it is you can just use the map in iPhones and find that part in Seattle and just keep scrolling in. And, if the picture is tagged correctly with where it was taken, then you will find that picture again. And it's another great way to surface, find that needle in the haystack, surface old pictures. So there is a huge number of things that you can do with the info feature. Some are new, some are old, but check it out because there is a wealth of things there.
Oh, Jeff, you have enlightened me. And I would say that map feature is so cool. I'm in my Photos app now, and if I tap the 3-dot ellipsis, there is a show map option on there. And you can zoom in just like you were talking about. I'm sure it's the same thing. Oh, that's so cool. You can see pictures that you've taken all over the map.
Other pictures that you took in the same place, which is interesting because, if you go to grandma's house up in, upstate New York, you can see all the pictures you've taken at grandma's house over the years in that location, or all the pictures that you took in Disney World over multiple trips. And that's sort of fun.
I'm zooming in now. Several months ago, the family and I, we visited Lincoln's birthplace in close to Elizabethtown in Kentucky. And sure enough, it's like it's already collected it right there that I can zoom in on the map. Oh, that's excellent. That is some great stuff on there. I know you have always talked about some of these apps that give you some of that access to the information, the metadata on there. But now it looks like Apple, especially iOS 15, is really baking a lot of these capabilities right into.
Nothing's better than having it all built in. That's just so much nicer.
That's good stuff. Oh man! All right, so visual lookup. But we could just do a whole hour just on that. Like I'm seeing all kinds of new things on that. Great stuff. Well, happy birthday to iPhone JD, Jeff. Thanks for all that you have done on that. It's great. And we won't see you next week. So happy Thanksgiving to everyone. But we'll be back the week after that.
See you in 2 weeks. Bye-bye. Bye-bye, everybody.
Bye.